I will briefly go over, touch on, summarize what we have learned in the first 5 lives. Okay, so first, what did we learn? We learned the fact that in Korean there are colors that can only be nouns and also colors that can be nouns but also adjectives as well. And then we answered the question. The question is, well, if that's the case, if I am using a color that can only be a noun, does it mean that I am severely technically limited when it comes to how I can use those colors? In other words, does it mean that I cannot use those colors in situations where I would have used a color as an adjective? In English, for example, of course, the answer is no, right? So we found out a couple of technical alternatives that will enable you to use colors that can only be nouns in all sorts of situations without having to change them into an adjective. Katie, thank you. And then what did we do? We spent a little bit of time focusing on nuance variations. For example, if you're gonna say red, well, what version of red are you going to use? And once again, these nuance variations are different from explaining what kind of red you're using by adding more words, like scary red. No, changing nuance variations means changing the word, just the version of it, without actually changing the meaning itself or adding any kind of extra words. So that's why it can be a little bit tricky. You don't get any hints or clues. Either you know the variation, the version that you are using, or you don't. Okay, so it requires a lot of practicing. Okay, and then what did we do? Well, actually, yeah, that's what we did up until now. Oh, I'm sorry. And then we talked about indications. What are indications? Sometimes you will see a syllable that is a part of some kind of a noun, a syllable that is there to indicate the color of that noun. However, indications are different from just words, right? You cannot take that one syllable and use it as an independent word. You cannot do that. Okay, so also, and those indications, yes, words that include those indications, I said, yes, they were made in the first place to begin with for one particular specific concept or thing. Okay, so yes, it requires a lot of studying vocabulary. Okay, now that's what we have learned throughout the course. And also, I'm sorry, we talked about a couple of variations too, right? Other than indications. How do you say the word color? And yes, we looked into 6 versions, right? And we looked into a very unique case in a version of white and a version of black. Yes, those 2 versions were versions that are very unique in the sense that they can be adjectives, but only attributive adjectives. So that's a very unique case. Okay, so taking all of that into consideration, what we have learned in the first 5 lessons, now we're going to practice. Okay, where is the material? Okay, here it is. So those who have the PDF file might have seen page number 11. Okay, so through page number 11, let's practice everything that we have learned up until now. I'm sorry, I have to fix something here on the board. Okay, so let's go to page number 11. Edna, hello. So let's take a look into the first sentence. How would we say something like, why did you write only this with the color orange? So let's say someone was writing a whole paragraph, a lot of colors, but they only wrote one word in orange. Okay, so that's what I'm gonna ask. Now, in Korean, as you can see, you don't say something like, write this in blue, in green, in purple. You say with the color orange. Okay, so now let's say, let's first talk about the 2 reasons why you would use with, right? Oh, it says say, yeah, sorry about that, practice. Okay, so let's talk about the 2 reasons why you would use with. We have gone over this a couple of times, right? So with. So there are two reasons, right? Number one, you can use it to indicate company. So when you're saying, I sleep with my cat, I came with my parents. Okay, so when you are indicating that someone or something is together with someone else or something else. Okay, then what is the second reason? You can also use it as a way of indicating means, right? Some kind of a tool, method that enables you to do something. Yes, for, yes, well. In other words, when you can change, yes, with into using. Okay, so for example, if I'm going to say, well, I drew this with this marker, I can say I drew this using this marker because this marker was the means, the tool that I used so that, yes, it would enable me to draw this. Okay, so yes, in Korean, depending on what you want to do with, of course, it will be completely different, right? And right now, in this case, I'm saying with the color orange. Okay, so in this case, which one should I use? Is it company or is it means? Let's fix this. Exactly, means. Okay, so you always have to be careful when it comes to using with, because if you use the wrong version, of course, that leads to too many misunderstandings, right? So what if I wanted to say, yes, use with as a way of indicating means, because, yes, it's something that enabled me, yes, it's something that I used to do something. Okay, so I wanted to write something in orange, well then, I need the color orange. Only if I have the color orange, that color orange will enable me to achieve my goal, writing this in orange. So I used the color orange to write something. Now let's say that's what I wanted to do, but I, by mistake of course, used the company version. Of course, there are a lot of versions that you can use to indicate company, right? Then now it sounds like I wrote something a piece of paper. I'm writing something. I wrote something, but with orange. So this is what it sounds like. Now this is scary, right? It's a little bit scary. Who is orange? Okay, are you seeing ghosts? Okay, so this is what it sounds like. So you have to be very careful when it comes to picking and choosing how you will use with. Of course, I don't want company, I'm talking about means. Okay, so also on the other hand, if someone says, did you come alone? And I'm gonna say, no, I came with a friend. In that case, I want to indicate company. But let's say, also by mistake, let's say I used the version that will indicate means. Now it sounds like then, I came using a friend. Yeah, okay. So in this case, now it sounds like I used my friend to come here. Okay, so using the wrong version always, yes, leads to a lot of misunderstandings. You used your friend like a horse to get here, or you wrote this with orange. Who's orange? Okay, so yes, of course, a version that you can use when you are indicating means, yes, would be, yes, first take a look at the word that you are using, take a look at the pronunciation of it. If it ends with a consonant minus one exception, the L or R consonant, then attach 으로. If it ends with a vowel plus one exception, the L or R consonant, then attach 로. Okay, so of course we're using the color orange. So another thing, what does that mean then? I said in Korean, you don't say write it in orange. You say write it with the color orange. Well, it means that then, yes, with modifies a noun. So we're not going to use a color as an adjective. We need a noun. Well, good. Doesn't matter anyway, right? Because orange Yes, happens to be a color that can only be a noun anyway. So good, doesn't matter. Okay, so does not hinder us at all. So let's try to write this sentence down in Korean then. Why? Yeah, you wrote everything else in black, but why only this word in orange? And why did you write? I'm not going to say why did you only write this, right? I'm going to make sure that only stays right next to the color orange. Sorry, this. Sorry, right, only this. Oops, I'm sorry about that. My glasses hit my phone. Right, only this. Yes. With the color orange. Okay, from here, now, this is our time to shine, right? Because building sentences, grammatically, technically, well, that's our bread and butter. We have been doing it for the last 2 years almost every day. Okay, so this is where we start shining. This is where all the technical breakdowns start to pay off, right? Okay, so yes, a lot of you Sparkles who have been attending these lives for a long time would already know what I'm about to do. Yes, supplementary information. With something would be something that I call supplementary information. So we're going to use the noun the color orange. Of course, no the. We're going to use a noun the color orange. And we need a verb. Well, we have a verb and only this as the object. And of course, I'm talking to you. I am not going to say did. Therefore, now if I take it away, now there is a big issue, right? Nothing indicates past tense, so the verb has to do it itself. So we're going to say wrote, and we have the adverb why. Okay, so now, yes, the standard way of doing things would be supplementary information, and then object, and then adverb, and then verb, right? But does it mean that I have to do everything always only the standard way? Of course not. Sometimes I can mix the order of words if I were to take into consideration the general theme of Korean grammar, right? Which is the later it appears, the more important it is. So it depends on what I want to emphasize more as long as the verb stays the last. Okay, so let's say this time, I am more focused on only this and with the color orange. This is what I'm really going to emphasize. Huh? Why orange? Out of all the colors. Now you wrote everything else in black. Why is this orange? So this time I'm going to drag supplementary information. Yes, that it would come after why and only this because I want it to be emphasized more compared to why and only this. Okay, so let's say I can say then 왜, why, and then only this. Yeah, only this. And plus why orange. Okay, so this. Now there are 3 versions of this, right? 이거, and 이것. So which one are we going to use as this? They can all be translated into this. Which one do we need? 1, 2, or 3? I see the answer in the comments. Yes, we're going to use version number 3, right? Okay, number 3. First, I'm going to eliminate this because this is a version that you use when you are placing this in front of some kind of a noun. Like when you're saying only this word, only this letter, only this consonant, whatever. Okay, but right now we're not doing it. We're just using this alone. Okay, so now we have 2 left. These are the 2 versions that you can use when you are using this alone, when you are not placing it in front of a noun. Now, in poetic Korean, it doesn't matter. Okay, so that's one of the biggest reasons why poetic Korean is so much easier to learn, because you don't really have to think about synonyms as much. You don't have to worry about them, because one will be too poetic if you use it for no reason whatsoever. But what if you're speaking poetic Korean anyway? Then it doesn't matter. Just memorize one yeah, just use whatever one you want. But in real Korean, you only keep the extra S in large 3 cases, right? When you are attaching one of these 3 particles. I'm not saying all particles, only these 3, right? The plural particle, 들, when you want to say these, when you want to use the 도 particle, also, in other words, as well, in other words, too, when you want to say, not only that, but this too. And when you have the only particle. Okay, so right now we happen to have only this. And unlike in English, only is not an independent standalone, right? It's a particle, therefore it has to be attached to the word that it modifies. So if only will go to this, well, then it means that I happen to be in one of these 3 situations then. So I'm gonna say 이것만. Okay, so I need the extra S here. And a little tip when it comes to pronunciation was, yes, when this S is in front of the N or M consonant, then it sounds like an N. Okay, so always keep in mind the variables when it comes to pronunciation. You don't always get what you are expecting. Okay, so right now, the S happens to be in front of an M. That's why I'm not going to have it sound like an S. I'm not going to have it sound like an M. I'm going to have it sound like an N. So it's going to sound like 이것만. 이것만. Okay, does that make sense? If it does, 계속할까요? Okay. So in poetic Korean, once again, yeah, you can keep the extra S for no reason whatsoever, just because you can, just because you know how to write it. But in real Korean, of course, it's a little bit more annoying. You have to know when to use it and when not to. Okay, so why only this? 왜 이것만? So now we have the adverb why. This only this. And then, yes, with color orange. We know the noun, the color orange, right? 주황색, 주황색. Okay, so the color orange. And of course, I am not going to give the H and H sound, right? It's somewhere in the middle of a word, therefore it's going to be silent. Okay, so the color orange. It's not orange as an adjective, right? I'm just going to write the here to make it more intuitive that it's a noun. But yes, actually there is no the in the sentence, right? I'm just keeping it there just to make it more intuitive that we're talking about a noun. Okay, and then right, but because I took away did, the verb now has to indicate past tense itself. So it's going to be wrote. Okay, so 쓰다, the display form of the verb write, a version, 주황색으로, with, I'm sorry about that. Okay, now because it ends with a consonant and it's not one of the exception, it's not the exception, the L or R consonant, yes, we're going to attach 으로 as with. And then, don't have enough space. Let's try to make it work. Okay, so 왜 이것만 주황색으로, and then I need write, but of course I don't want the display form. I don't want the ta ending. I need its actual form in past tense. So let's go to inflection route number 1 to go get it. To go get the actual form, past tense ending. Okay, so we already know what to do, right? Technically breaking things down, that's our bread and butter. Okay, so we have a situation where the display form that I am using ends with the U vowel, and there is only one syllable left once ta is erased. We have a perfect example. 쓰다. Okay, 쓰다. Now, of course, why are we in inflection route number 1? Because of the ending we're using, the soyo ending. So in this case, yeah, a 3-step formula, right? Remove ta, change u into all, and then attach the ending. Okay. So, no 다, of course, I'm going to change the into 여 and then now attach the ending. So now we have a whole bunch of S's. So now we have the actual form, past tense of the verb write, which is wrote. 썼어요, 썼어요, 썼어요. Okay. Okay, so we don't have enough space, so I'm not going to write wrote, but just think of it as wrote. And all we have to do at the end is place a 물음표, right? Okay, so now we have the whole 문장. 천천히 읽을게요. Okay, 왜 이것만 주황색으로 썼어요? 왜 이것만 주황색으로 썼어요? 왜 이것만 주황색으로 썼어요? Why did you write only this with the color orange? So always keep in mind when you're saying write it in red, write it in blue. In Korean, you have to say with the color blue, with the color red. So it means that you always need with and you need a noun because with only modifies a noun. Okay, so, but we don't have to worry, right? Because all colors can be nouns. It's just that there are some colors that can't be adjectives, but all colors can be nouns, right? So just take the noun form of whatever color you're using and say with the color orange, red, green, purple, whatever it may be. Okay, does that make sense? If it does, 넘어갈까요? Okay. So that's how you would say something along the lines of, why did you write only this with the color orange? Okay, so we used all the words here. Now let's go to number 2. White shoes get dirty easily. So let's say tomorrow we're going to go hiking and let's say it rained like 4 hours ago. Okay, so it rained 4 hours ago and yeah, after the rain stops, we're going to go hiking. So well, of course, white shoes can get dirty easily from the mud, right? I mean, of course, all shoes will get dirty, but it shows more, right? So we can say white shoes get dirty easily. So I'm placing white in front of a noun, which means that I'm trying to use it as an attributive adjective, right? The question should be, can I? Can I use white as an attributive adjective? What would be the answer? Carlin, thank you. Or do I have to change it into a noun and say shoes of the color white? Can I use it as an adjective, as an attributive adjective? Exactly, yeah, I can, because white happens to be a color that can be a noun and also an adjective. Okay, so, yeah, what am I going to do? I'm not going to write it in white, of course, for obvious reasons, right? So, now if I want to say white shoes get dirty easily, let's try to say that then. Just imagine that it's white. Okay, so let's break it down then. When you're placing an attributive adjective with a noun, do not try to separate them when it comes to, well, the part of speech. If the noun is the subject, then they are all together the subject. And of course, I don't think we need the plural. Of course, I'm saying both of your shoes. Okay, and we have the predicative adjective dirty, but technically, if you give it the get ending, we're going to give it the get plus adjective ending, right? And if you do that, now you have a verb. And now you have an adverb easily. Okay, so yeah, because white can be an attributive adjective, well, first, let's try to use the basic version of white. 하얗다. Okay, so, but of course I don't want its display form. I want to give it the N ending according to inflection route number 2, right? So, let's go to inflection route number 2 to go inflected. Okay, so, wait. So, we have the H situation, right? Now, in the H situation, you once again have to divide the situation into two, when you have verbs and when you have adjectives. And yes, we have the adjective white. So when you have an adjective that ends with H once ta is removed, outside of the exceptions, we will apply a three-step formula, right? Outside of the exceptions, of course, there is a list of exceptions, but white is not one of them, right? Okay, so because I want the N ending, we are in inflection route number 2. So I'm going to apply the three-step formula. Remove ta, remove H, and then attach the ending. Okay, so 하얀. So what do I have? I have the basic form of white in its attributive adjective form. So because it's an attributive adjective, you know that I used it to place it in front of some kind of a noun, right? In this case, that noun being 신발, shoes. 하얀 신발, 하얀 신발. Okay, so, but, yes, of course, what if I wanted to give off some kind of a nuance? Then I could have used a nuance variation, but let's just say, yeah, I could have used a nuance variation, but let's say I'm not really giving off any kind of a nuance right now. I'm just saying, you know, white shoes. Okay, and also, in page number 10, when we were talking about variables, there were two color words that were very, very, very unique, right? Page number 10, unique versions of white and black. Why were they unique technically? Because, yes, usually if you have a color that can be an adjective, it automatically usually means that it can be a predicative adjective and also an attributive adjective. But these two are very unique in the sense that they are only used as an attributive adjective. Well, we are using white as an attributive adjective. So it means that, yeah, if I wanted to, I could have used 희다 as well. So in this case, when you're using the basic form of white, in other words, what does that mean? What does basic form mean? When I'm using a version that is not technically giving off any kind of a specific nuance. In its attributive adjective form, is there a huge difference between 하얀 and using 희다 as an attributive adjective? I would say there isn't a significant difference. It comes down to habit. So, okay. Now, so what if I'm going to use 희다? The display form of the adjective 희다. But of course, I don't want a display form. I don't want the ta ending. Why is that? Because it does nothing, because it means nothing. Okay, so I'm going to give it the N ending. And we know what to say, right? So we're going to say 감사합니다 to inflection route number 2, right? Because it's going to give us a free pass. Thank you. Why is that? Because, yeah, the rules of inflection route number 2, this time, if the display form that you are using ends with a vowel, any kind of a vowel, then you get a free pass, meaning all you have to do is remove ta, immediately attach the ending. So if I want to use this version of white in its attributive adjective form, then I'm going to say 흰. Exactly, 흰, 흰. So it literally comes down to habit. Now, as we are learning Korean, we see a whole bunch of cases like this, right? Where there are synonyms and you can use any of them because none of them are poetic. Yes, it's just that it's a habit that everyone has. Everyone is different, right? So literally, when, for example, like 5 people sit together and are having a conversation, yes, none of them are speaking poetic Korean, but they can still use different versions of a word just because it depends on habit. Okay, so you have the habit of using this version, but I have the habit of using that version. So it literally just comes down to habit, which means that you have to be aware of them. You never know who you will run into. So I can use 하얀, but I could have used 흰 if I wanted to. Okay, so 하얀 신발. Okay, so white shoes, and then let's go to easily. Now, the adjective easy, 쉽다, the display form of it. Now, I gave you easy. How will you change it into easily? Now, what's the easiest way to do it? At some point, you have to know 5 ways of doing it, but what's the easiest way? Yes, we will talk about it in more detail when we have the time, but right now, adverbs are not the main topic, colors are. So yes, let's use the most basic version. Basic method that you can use to change an adjective into an adverb that best expresses the essence of that adjective. So easy, I'm just going to remove 다, change it into 게, and now you have easily, 쉽게. Okay, so 하얀 신발, 쉽게, and then get dirty. So I'm going to place the display form of a version of dirty, 더럽다. But of course, I don't want the 다 ending. Why? Because it does nothing, because it means nothing. Okay, so I'm going to give it the get ending, the get plus adjective ending. For example, when you're saying something like, oh, it gets heavy if it's wet, or it gets dark early these days, or it gets interesting starting episode 3, whatever. Okay, so yes, let's go. And that ending belongs to inflection route number 1, right? So let's go to inflection route number 1 and go get it. Thank you for the donut. 도넛 감사합니다. Okay, wait. So, what is the get plus adjective ending? I'll just give you the actual form of it. 저요. Okay, so we have the be situation, right? So once again, if you have the be situation, it means that we have to once again divide the situation into 2, right? When you have verbs, and when you have adjectives. Right now we have the adjective dirty. Okay, so with adjectives that end with be, once 다 is removed, the norm would be to apply a 4-step formula. There are a couple of exceptions that are applied a 3-step formula, right? But 더럽다, is it one of the exceptions? It's not, right? So we're going to apply the 4-step formula. Remove 다, remove the be, place wall as the irregular middle section, and then attach the ending. So remove 다, remove be, and then place wall, and then place the ending. 져요, 더러워져요, 더러워져요. So now we no longer have the adjective dirty, now we have the verb get dirty. 더러워져요. Okay, so this is why I always say, well, if the topic is going to be colors, it means when you're learning Korean, I always emphasize this, right? If you're talking about colors, if that's the main topic, then it means that 1% at most of your energy goes to colors, 99% inflection. Let's say we move on. Let's just say we already went through the number course, but let's say, oh yeah, we finished the color course. This time let's talk about numbers. That's going to be the main topic. What does that mean? It means 1% of your energy goes to numbers, 99% inflection. Because learning all of this, yeah, what colors can be nouns, adjectives, if they are nouns, if they can only be nouns, how do I use them? Well, what if they can be adjectives? Can they be predicative adjectives or attributive adjectives? What are the variables? How do I say the 6 versions of the word color? Now, studying all of that means nothing if you cannot inflect, right? Okay, so always stay sharp on inflection. So now we have 하얀 신발 쉽게 더러워져요. Get dirty. Okay. So once again, we have the whole 문장. 천천히 읽을게요. 하얀 신발 쉽게 더러워져요. Or 흰 신발 쉽게 더러워져요. Okay, so, and once again, this time I'm going to give the H sounds a clear H sound because they are not in the middle of a word, they're at the very start of a word. Okay, does that make sense? If it does, 넘어갈까요? Yeah, exactly. So stay sharp. There is no getting ready for inflection. There's only staying ready. Okay. So let's move on to number 3. Are you okay? Your lips are so blue. You know, like when you have like a cold, a very bad cold, your lips turn blue. So let's say that's what's happening to my 친구. So I'm gonna ask my 친구, are you okay? Your lips are so blue. Okay, so let's try to say this then. So my 친구 has a 감기, a cold, of course, not the temperature cold, but the cold that you catch, 감기. Are you okay? So he says that he's all better now, but I don't think so. Because your lips are so blue. Okay. So now let's go to inflection once again. Well, let's first finish this sentence. Of course, no is, am, was, were, are. Of course, I'm talking to you. We have the predicative adjective okay. Okay, which is 괜찮다. But of course, I don't want its display form, right? So I have to inflect it. I want to give it the actual form, present tense ending, the 요 ending. Well, good, because we keep talking about the H situation, right? You would notice that you see a lot of H's when you're talking about colors. Yes, a lot of colors have display forms that end with H once ta is removed. And because of that, I keep talking about H. I say, when you have the H situation, once again divide it into 2. Do you have a verb or do you have an adjective? Yes, you once again have an adjective. Okay, and I say, yes, usually you would apply a 4-step formula in inflection route number 1, that is, right? Usually. So what was the 4-step formula? Remove ta, remove H, change the vowel that came right before H into an e or ye. And then what do? Then you attach the ending. But, yes, usually, but I keep mentioning exceptions, right? So of course, if you have been studying inflection for a long time, well, and if you have the PDF file will list all the exceptions. So the exceptions, yes, this is what you would usually do, but with the exceptions, you apply a 3-step formula. What are those exceptions? Yes, typically in large, for now, when you have a double 받침, MH or LH, plus the adjective good, 좋다. So if you have one of these exceptions, they are also adjectives that end with H once ta is removed, but they are the exceptions. In this case, we're going to apply a 3-step formula. That's why you hear the word 괜찮아요. So remove ta, place a or all as the irregular middle section, and then attach the ending. And that's why, for example, if it's inflection route number 2, then that's why you hear 괜찮을 거예요, something like that. Because in that case, in inflection route number 2, the irregular middle section would be right? Okay, so when you want to say, it will be okay, 괜찮을 거예요. But right now, we are in inflection route number 1. That's why you hear, 괜찮아요. Okay. So, 괜찮다. Well, yeah, a perfect example of one of the exceptions. I see a double 받침. Remove ta, of course it's going to be not all, right? And then now I can attach the ending, 괜찮아요. 괜찮아요. Okay, so now we have the actual form, present tense of okay, which is okay. So I can actually place it in the 문장, the sentence, right? Okay, so 괜찮아요? Are you okay? And then, of course, I'm talking about your lips. And I don't think the plural would be needed because, of course, I'm not saying, oh, well, only your upper lip is blue, so it's okay. I'm not saying that, of course. Your lips. And of course, no is, am, was, were, are. So we have the subject lip, and then the adverb so, and then, I'm sorry, let's write it in blue. The predicative adjective blue. Okay, well, the question is, can I use blue as a predicative adjective, or do I need to change it into a noun? Can I use blue as a predicative adjective? Okay, exactly. Yes, blue happens to be a color that can be an adjective. Good. So first, let's place 입술, lips, lip. And then, yeah, I can move on if I want to. But let's give it a particle. Yes, we're not speaking poetic Korean here. Yes, unfortunately, right? Because poetic Korean would be so much easier to learn, but we're not going to learn poetic Korean. Okay, we're going to learn real Korean. And in spoken Korean, yes, you don't use these particles for no reason whatsoever, right? I need a very, very specific reason. Right now, I'm going to use it for, of course, depending on perspective, you can say that. A couple of reasons can apply all at the same time. But typically right now, I want it for reason number 2. Let's say I'm surprised. Exactly. I take a look at my friend and I'm going to say, oh my God, like, yeah. Did you look at a mirror? Because I think you're sick. I think you're very sick. So, yeah. To imbue the nuance of surprise, I will give the subject a subject complement. Okay, so exactly, 입술이. And then, of course, a version of so can be 너무. Now, so all of you said collectively that yes, blue can be a predicative adjective. Okay, yeah, very good, very good. It can. But now, which version of the predicate of the adjective blue would you use in this case? Now, when someone's lips turn blue because they have a cold, it's not going to be a super, super vivid blue, right? So, number 2. So if it were to be very vivid, it actually has to be like this. Yeah, a human being's lips don't turn this blue, right? Usually, of course. Okay, so it's not going to be a very vivid type of blue. And if I'm saying, hey, you're sick, that's something negative. So always keep in mind, if you're going to call something vivid, I mean this kind of vivid. Okay, so I'm going to say 퍼렇다. Okay, it's not a very vivid type of blue because I'm talking about your lips, but it is negative. Hey, I think you're sick. I'm not saying, oh, your lips are blue, that's awesome. No, I'm saying, I think you're sick right now. Okay, so 퍼렇다. Now, I'm going to inflect it because, of course, once again, learning all of this means nothing if I can't inflect at the end. Okay. So, now we just talked about exceptions, right? 퍼렇다 is not one of those exceptions. So I'm going to go back to the 4-step formula. Yes, and I'm going to give it the 요 ending, the actual form, present tense ending. Yes, we once again have an adjective. And this adjective is not one of the exceptions, unlike okay. Okay was one of the exceptions, but not this one. 퍼렇다. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is remove ta, and then remove the h, and then I'm going to change the vowel that came right before h into an e or ye, right? And then number 4, attach the ending. So now what do we have? Okay, so once again, remove ta, remove h, and then the vowel that came right before h, all. Now, if this vowel is anything other than ya or 여, if it is one of these two, then change it into ye. But if it's not, change it into e. And right now, it is not. So I'm going to change it into 에. So 퍼래요. and then attach the ending. So 퍼래요, 퍼래요. Okay. So now I used blue, a not very vivid plus negative version of blue, yes, in its predicative adjective form. So that's why I always say when you're learning something, if it's too simple, 1 plus 1 is 2, goodbye, I always say, wait, that's kind of ominously simple. So you always have to try to ask and try to get an answer, what version of this word am I looking at? Okay, so 괜찮아요? 입술이 너무 퍼래요. Okay, so I made it sound like I am super concerned. Well, I used two devices, right? I gave it a subject particle to indicate that, hey, I'm surprised, I'm shocked a little bit, this is concerning. And I used the negative version of blue. 괜찮아요? 입술이 너무 퍼래요. 괜찮아요? 입술이 너무 퍼래요. Okay, so for example, then, what if someone is wearing makeup and let's say they have to play a role in a musical, so their lips have to be blue. They have to be blue. So in that case, how should I change it then? Of course, then I don't need a subject particle. If someone says, hey, how do I look? Do I look the part? The character that I'm playing has blue lips. And I'm going to say, oh yeah, 입술. And then now I don't need a negative version. I can just use, let's say for example, the basic form, 파래요. So I can say, oh, 입술 파래요. So 입술 파래요. So always, even if you know the word lip and even if you know the word blue, actually you have to ask yourself a very fundamental question. What does knowing a word even mean? What does that even mean? Because, for example, once again, because of inflection, I always say this, right? In Korean, this can be a little bit counterintuitive, but saying, I know the verb walk, that concept does not exist, right? That literally makes no logical sense. Because what do you mean? Do you mean you know how to say if walk, or walk but, or walk so, or because walk? Because in all cases, the word will look different, right? And also, when it comes to something like this, also you have to know which nuanced version you're using. Is it the happy walk? Is it the energetic walk? Is it the positive blue or is it the negative blue? Okay, so this is why there are so many misunderstandings in real life conversations. Okay, does that make sense? So always ask yourself the question, a very fundamental one and a very counterintuitive question. If I know the word blue, what does that even mean? Okay. Now, the reason why I emphasize this so much is because it is wistful and sad, I'm sorry about that, to see cases where two people, I sometimes say this, but it's been a while. Now, I see this happen all the time. What's very wistful and sad. Now, when I was looking at this kind of a thing happening in 2021, for example, I thought that it would take about 2 or 3 years to be cleared up. But we're in 2025, we're almost actually in 2026. And I don't believe that it's getting any better. So, now, it's very wistful and sad to see a situation where I see two people. Now, they could have become best friends, good friends, maybe even best friends, but they end up not becoming friends. Well, sometimes they happen, they end up being enemies, they hate each other. Okay, and the reason is, of course, language barrier. And once again, whenever I say language barrier, I am not talking about the language barrier between Korean and French or Korean or Spanish. I'm not talking about that, right? I'm talking about Korean and poetic Korean. That's the language barrier I'm talking about. The language barrier between Korean and poetic Korean. Okay, so now in poetic Korean, yes, nuance is neglected. That's a very clear trait that poetic Korean has. Well, maybe I shouldn't say poetic Korean. I'll put it this way. Now, when a curriculum lacks resources, what do I always say? What do I mean by resource? Well, time, depth, or patience, or a format that facilitates bilateral communication between the teacher and the student. If a curriculum lacks any of those, and therefore has to prioritize, which means throwing away things that they cannot prioritize, then nuance is the first to go. Why is that? Because it's the least important? No, it's the most important. But because I can get away with teaching nuance in a lazy way. What's the example that I always use? Let's say someone shows me a version of cold, but they show me the happy version of cold. And they ask me, is this cold? Can I use this word in a real life conversation? And I say, yeah, you can. So this person goes along and places it in a context like this. I hate winter so much because it's cold. Now that makes no sense whatsoever, right? That makes no sense whatsoever. Okay, so this person, figures out that this person was doing something wrong. So he comes back to me and says, well, I embarrassed myself because of you. You lied to me. Now, technically, I can get away with this. No one can hold me accountable because I'm going to say, well, technically, did I lie to you? Really think about it. Technically, you showed me a word that means cold, and you asked me, can I use this in a real conversation? I said yes. You never told me, you never asked me, is this a happy version of cold? Therefore, would it sound weird if I place it in a context that is saying, I hate winter so much because it's so cold? You never asked me that. So that's why I said, yeah, you can use it. So that's why nuance is the first to go. But in a real life conversation between two sentient beings, nuance is everything. Okay, so that's why, for example, let's say someone looks at, let's say we're decorating a room, and this person, let's say, is in charge of deciding whether we are ready or not, if the room is well decorated or not. So this person comes along and says, oh, well, 퍼래요. Okay, but this person, let's say, was wearing a smile. And yeah, this person was saying this in a very common, collected way with a smile. So, well, then let's say, yeah, I decorated the room blue. So I'm going to say, okay, well, I guess you like it. Okay, well then, but actually, this person was saying, well, it shouldn't be blue, right? It shouldn't be. So let's say this is where the misunderstanding comes. This is where the language barrier between poetic Korean and real Korean kicks in. Because if someone learned Korean through a curriculum that focuses on poetic Korean, which means, yeah, they're going to take a lot of shortcuts. And if they are going to take a lot of shortcuts, it means that nuance is first to go. Well then, yeah, I didn't know that this was a negative version of blue. So yeah, I thought that you liked it. Or at least I thought that you didn't hate it, at least. Now this person who is using a lot of nuance when they are speaking Korean because they don't speak poetic Korean, would think that they were super, super clear. Yes, yeah, I just told you very clearly that I don't like it. It shouldn't look like this. It's negatively blue. So that's what I mean by the language barrier between poetic Korean and real Korean. And I always emphasize that I don't believe that a conversation can just completely come crashing down if at least one party is aware of a language barrier. I think the real problem comes when none of them are aware that there's a language barrier. What do I mean by that? Let's say this person reached a very high level in poetic Korean, therefore thinks that, well, there shouldn't be too many words that I don't know. So if I really misunderstand something, then it must be that, well, let's say this person is saying, well, why didn't you just outright tell me that you don't like it, therefore I should fix it? Why do you expect me to read your mind? And this person said, well, I just clearly told you that this is negatively blue, therefore it should be fixed. Now this person, if they reached a very high level in poetic Korean, sometimes that backfires. That's a double-edged sword. Because now this person can quickly come to the conclusion that, well, I know the word blue. I studied Korean for quite some time, so therefore there shouldn't be something that I cannot understand. You never told me anything that indicates that you didn't like the room. If you did, I would have known it. If you, for example, used the word I don't like it, it should be fixed, you have to change that. Yes, I studied Korean for a long time. If you told me something, I would have catched it, but you didn't tell me anything. On this side, this person will be equally confused, saying, huh? I thought I was super, super clear. So that's why poetic Korean is a double-edged, well, actually, I shouldn't even be calling it a double-edged sword. It's not for conversations. It's for writing poetry. Okay, so actually, yeah, that was it for today. There are more questions that we can look into. 4, 5, 6, 7. We're going to do that tomorrow. 내일